Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 165 of the Citrix session. It's hard to believe, isn't it? I'm your host, Bill Sutton. With me today is Andy Whiteside from XenTegra. Andy, you want to say hello to everyone?
I can't believe we're at 165.
I know. Same
Can't
here.
believe we're at 165. And hopefully a lot of people have listened to, some of the ones before this. I'm just, super happy and proud that we keep doing these. I know it's the right thing to do. I know people come up to us and talk about how much value they get out of these things. It's just, it's what needs to be done.
Yeah, I was at a conference or at a meeting, I don't know how long ago, maybe a few months ago, and I just happened to be walking down the hall and the guy said, "Hey, are you the podcast guy?" I was like, "Well, yeah, I guess so. I'm one of them."
Yeah.
I didn't even realize he didn't see my name or anything. I guess he must have watched the video version because
Yeah.
he just recognized me from that. So it's nice to know we got folks out there.
We've got hundreds of listeners. I would like to have thousands of listeners, but we
Yes,
definitely have hundreds of listeners.
definitely. So also want to introduce a frequent contributor to this show, and that's Geremy Myers from Citrix. Jeremy, say hello.
Hello guys, I'm also a podcast guy. And by the way,
You
I
are.
can't start my video, so I will be just the face on the podcast
The
today.
voice.
Just the voice, just the voice.
Yep. Well, okay, great. So today we're going to do a blog on the Citrix site entitled New Citrix Features, Improve Resiliency and Minimize Downtime by Isaac Stasevich. I don't know. That's the best I could do.
Hey,
So,
Bill, before we do that, can I do the commercial?
of course.
So if you're listening to this, you're obviously a Citrix guy. At least I hope you are, because if you're not, that'd be a little weird.
Yeah.
But if you're listening to this, you're a Citrix guy, you work for an organization. XenTegra is in it for the real reasons, for the right reasons, including, selling you the product, helping you implement the product. But the thing I think is most important that someone listening to this would want to know, at a minimum, talk to us about a support contract. I mean, we can give you a team of guys that have a lot of depth, and if they need to, they can call Citrix at a super high level and get into levels of support that might take you days or weeks to get through. And it's not that expensive. My short message is, it's like the insurance guy. I need to make sure you have at least an insurance plan so that when you have that late in the day, middle of the night need to call somebody, you can get into a system and get some help. Weekends, that kind of thing. Talk to us about a support contract at a very minimum.
Yeah, it's a great ad, Andy, and very important for everyone to know. I actually met with a customer late last week, and we were talking about a big project for them. And I said, well, you really ought to have something in place for your existing environment, either right now or technically right now, or as we move forward with the new environment, because a project is going to get you super expert consulting resources to get things implemented and configured and stood up the right way and architected and designed. But at the end of the day, if it's 2 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday and something goes sideways, you need somebody to call.
Yeah.
You need to have a phone number where somebody can pick up, or even if it's just in the evening and you've got a question, or during the day and you've got a question, and having that quote unquote, like we call it every once in a while, the bat phone, to pick up and get an expert on the line to be able to help you through a problem is really important to the care and feeding of an environment.
But Bill, I don't want to belabor this one, but the customer you're talking about, they had a super, super smart architect guy that became the manager, that became the director, and he's so far removed from being hands-on, but he's the guy they're going to have to call at 3 o'clock in the morning to get help. We don't want customers in that situation.
No, we don't. Absolutely not. So, all right, let's talk about resiliency and improving improving uptime, minimizing downtime. So this has really become top of mind, I think, as things have moved to the cloud. One of the questions that we get a lot with customers that are on premises that want to move to the cloud is, what about the things that we have that make it resilient? Highly available components, a pair of controllers, a pair of NetScalers, what have you. How do we do that in the cloud? And Citrix has gone a long way towards making or creating resiliency in their cloud offering, to enable things so that they're not a single point of failure, or if they are, there are ways to work around it or that automatically work around it. But what we find a lot of times is customers don't really know how to configure these things. They think they have them running, but perhaps they're not running properly. And guess what? They don't find out that they're not running properly until there's an event. And we want to help minimize the likelihood of that. We want all customers' environments to be really resilient, and highly available. Any comments on that, Geremy?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, going back to the good old days of IMA, right? So the XenApp 6.5, configuration deployment, just that
Right.
architecture style. A lot of folks miss that for the longest time. Why? Why? Well, it's because every single XenApp host had what? Copy of the database, right? So this local host cache. So, that was eventually added into the FMA or the more modern 7.x architecture. But as it turns out, we're on, what are we on? 2402. So we're many, many iterations into this. And
We'll
as
just
it
call it
turns out,
20. We'll just call
we'll
it
call
20.
it 20 iterations of this. This is a feature that's baked into not only the on-prem product of FMA, but now even the cloud product in particular.
Yep.
There are some misconfigurations that can happen that could impact your ability to function in any sort of cloud outage, power outage, that sort of thing, that just folks don't know about, right? So, so I'll plug two things. Number one, there is, of course, Citrix documentation that is great, but what's even better is sort of the best practices, leading practices, if you will, out on Tech Zone, or even just the community sites, right? So there's a few different things that are out there, but it'd be nice to have stuff like this pointed out within the product itself. So if you're in a situation where, listen, you want to find out in an outage that you have something misconfigured, what can you do in advance? And so what we've just added into the product is proactive notifications about what can be improved.
Absolutely. So why don't we talk a little bit about what localhost cache did in the past, and relate that to what it does now.
So I can handle that because that's my old days, right? So there was a database. So in that situation, I hope make sure I remember this right. There was a SQL database living somewhere,
Right.
hopefully, on a SQL server and treated like a real database, but not always.
Not always.
And a lot of times, the controller, correct. What do we call the old controllers?
Oh man! Oh geez, we had the IMA database, and they were the zone
was the
data
one in
collectors,
charge?
data collectors. It was the data
Data
collectors.
collectors. Yep.
So
Oh
you had
my!
the data collect. Anyway, they would have a read local, read only cache of the database,
Right.
and that was their resiliency in case it went offline. What the primary one, the zone data collector, primary and second. I'm not. You guys straighten me out on the terminology here, but the premise was the controllers all had a copy of it, and when
Right.
you configured the environment, you told it to talk to this one, talk to this one, talk to this one, unless you had a load balancer in place and you told it to talk to a load balancer that then knew how to talk to those two things. And the whole point was to eliminate the possibility, which I only saw once, which is an XML black hole, where you couldn't communicate with, or you could communicate with everybody, but nobody knew what was going on, so you just assumed the world lost its mind and nothing would work.
Right. And having a local copy, or a read-only copy of the database in other locations would still allow users to connect to workloads during the loss of the database or the loss of one of the data collectors, because it could elect a new data collector from the pool based on how most recently they had joined the farm. But that's irrelevant. Really, the point was that there were multiple copies of this database available for user sessions to query to know what applications were available and to allow users to launch them as long as they had connectivity.
Which was very appropriate for its time, but very legacy at this point.
Yeah, very chatty, very legacy.
Didn't scale. That was the big thing. It didn't scale
Not
whatsoever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So today we have the local host cache. Jeremy, I'm putting you on the spot here. Lives where in a DaaS environment?
So it lives in two different locations. So we'll talk about CVAD first, right? So, in the CVAD architecture, you have these desktop delivery controllers, these DDCs, these brokers, if you will, and they have direct connections to the database. Unlike the days of yore, where every XenApp server had a local access database, none of the VDAs have this database. But we do have a local host cache that lives on those delivery controllers. So for whatever reason, the DDCs lose access to the database server. They've got a backup copy. You don't get all of the features, but you do get enough to keep the environment running in any sort of database outage, which is great. Now, when you think about this in terms of DaaS, we don't have DDCs sitting on site. What do we have instead? Well, you've got
Cloud
these
connectors.
DDCs that live in the cloud, and you've got cloud connectors that live in a resource location. So you could have multiple resource locations. Each resource location could have its own collection of cloud connectors. So you might have an on-premise location, you might have a cloud location, so on and so forth. But that cloud connector has a local database as well, and that is the quote unquote local host cache. So for whatever reason, you do lose access to the cloud because there could be a Citrix cloud outage. It could be your internet connection goes down. This is some of the conversations we have with customers. What happens in those scenarios? Well, guess what? We've got a local copy that we can fall back onto, and there's a service that sits on the cloud connector that syncs it offline. So it's a SQL Express database, actually, that runs locally.
And that whole conversation enough is the reason why most customers should be using DaaS.
Yes, and the one we're going to have about the next option for resiliency, which is service continuity.
Yeah.
But
Hey,
absolutely,
Bill, you may or may not be sharing your screen on purpose. You want to share it again? Sorry.
I do. I intended to.
Yeah, I told you to stop, and you didn't bring it back. All right, thank you.
So, the point of this article is to talk about misconfigurations and how we can minimize them and make sure that customers are set up for high availability and resiliency. So let's talk about the other item here. That's before we talk about how they mitigate misconfigurations. Let's talk about the other item that this is targeted to, which is service continuity. Which one of you wants to take that?
Geremy, you're up.
You want to take a stab at that one?
No, I really want you to do it or Bill to do it, but you to do it. I'm usually just the dumb host that asks questions.
Okay. There are times where you might lose access to the DaaS service. In fact, your local workstation might lose access. And so part of what happens during service continuity is your local machine, your local instance of a workspace app actually caches, kind of a connection lease. So this is something that we also had in previous iterations, even on-prem, where you could connection lease and basically say, hey, listen, if I lose access to connecting to the cloud, workspace service would basically pick up that has happened. But it also has cache leases and knows how to reconnect to some of your resources. So you might see a message, within your workspace app. In fact, Bill's got this up here, where I can't connect to workspace. Certain things aren't available, certain things are. But in this case, he's got a hosted version of Chrome with a connection lease, so he could click Chrome, and it would allow him to connect to that Chrome application sitting in a resource locations, despite the fact that workspace might be down as well. So again, he could be an internal user accessing something that's internal. Doesn't really matter, but there's certain scenarios where you just lose access to that to the workspace service itself. And so this is sort of the workaround for that. I wouldn't say the workaround, it is the resiliency piece baked into it as well.
Yeah, the key here is a workspace outage. So whether that's the workspace service or whether that's the actual Citrix cloud service, the fact that it's cached those tokens to the workspace app, it does give the user the ability to reconnect with a message. So they have the ability to select applications that are published to them that are made available offline. And essentially, when they're not offline per se, if they click on that application, it's going to make a direct connection to the VDA and allow them to launch their applications to continue working while there's a potential workspace or other cloud-related outage. And like Geremy said, this doesn't necessarily mean the Citrix services are down. This could mean a connection problem in your cloud provider, a connection problem from your premise, and if your workloads are on premises, or you've lost a connection to one side of your cloud, then you can still access your apps.
Yes, and it's not likely to be the Citrix control plane. It's more likely to be a connectivity issue. However, it has happened. Not much, but it has happened.
Yeah, it has happened. So moving on in the article to the features that minimize misconfigurations, because what we find is when it comes to service continuity, I've seen this a few times, it's really pretty easy to turn on. And we probably ought to talk about the web plugin too, Geremy, I suspect. But when it comes to service continuity, it's literally a checkbox in your cloud tenant to turn it on. And then if you're leveraging the web workspace, you're not using the actual full workspace app, there is a plugin, I believe that's what it's called, that can go in your browser, Chrome browser, Edge, etc., that allows it to cache those tokens in the browser so that users that leverage just the browser for access and launch can have the same effect. The service continuity can have the same effect as if they were running the app.
Now, is that just for this session, or is that for a period of time beyond the workspace app or the browser session?
Yeah, I believe, Geremy, correct me if I'm wrong, the connection leases do have a timeout value. They stay around for a while. I don't remember the actual length.
You know what? I knew someone was going to ask that. I'm looking that up now, but I know it does. It has a life that's. I think it's two things. I think it's configurable. I think it's up to 30 days. I want to say.
It is. It is. You can
uh,
configure the leases for up to 30 days here. It says, I don't think they are by default set that long, but you can configure them up for up to 30 days.
We can
Yeah.
come back to that, but it is
Yeah.
nice to know it's configurable.
Yeah, for sure.
But and here's the other thing too is I don't recall if service continuity is turned on by default or not. I think
I don't think-
probably not.
I don't think
Yeah, so that's the first potentially misconfiguration. I think maybe from a security perspective, you could choose to have it turned off and on. Maybe that's why we don't have it turned on by default. But I think that's probably the first piece is, a lot of customers have no idea. They just don't even turn it on. That's probably step one. Yep.
Right. So in the article here that we're going to talk about, the cloud console, the DaaS console rather, in the zones node of the console enables you to see what these red, I guess, triangles or what have you, that there's something wrong, and you can click on troubleshoot and actually see what the recommended actions are. So if you don't have the localized cache enabled properly, you don't have service continuity turned on, or other items that may be misconfigured at the zone level, then the console will actually warn you of this and provide you a direction towards configuring it properly or getting it configured.
Yep. So in this case, the error message that pops up here, so this is not service continuity, but if you click into that, Bill, it talks about the number of cloud connectors. So when you think about it, listen, the cloud connector is not normally accepting registrations for clients. So in normal operating behavior, you might be able to get with 2 cloud connectors, for most environments. But when you think about it, if we go into local host cache mode, then you've got endpoints that are VDAs that are going to start registering with the cloud connectors, and that's going to increase the amount of resource utilization. So one of the things that it'll point out here is, number one, you need to have more so you can spread that around. And number two, and this is more in the document that's linked out from this blog post, is make sure you size these guys appropriate as well, right? So if you've got a low number of virtual CPUs, you've got too many or too many VDAs for that resource location per local host cache or a cloud connector. Just some things to consider. In this case, it's just simply calling out, we might have a location with 1 connector.
Right.
We might have one with 2.
Yeah, that's an important point. So we're talking about resiliency, and we focused initially on the local host cache and service continuity, but this is really the screenshot here is really talking about more basic things, like you don't have the proper number of cloud connectors, or perhaps you have cloud connectors that are off or offline or having problems, and it's going to warn you to that effect here, and you can immediately go take action.
Yep.
And then a little bit further down, it talks about the default configurations of the VDA or of the local host cache. One key thing here, default power managed desktops or power managed VDAs in a pool delivery group are not available for new connections during a local host cache event. And that's because we can't rely on power management during service disruption. I do believe, however, that these, refresh me if I'm wrong here, Geremy, but I believe that these service continuity does enable connectivity to pooled machines, unlike the local host cache.
I don't remember. I'm pretty sure it does.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Yep.
So there are some changes here made to the interface relative to the delivery group settings for turning on making resources available using the local host cache. Used to be this was done via PowerShell, but now it's done in the interface, the DaaS interface. So bringing some of these resiliency features into DaaS, really important. Go ahead, Geremy.
I would say, and here's the other thing too, is you don't want to wait until there's an outage to find out if your outage plan works. So what's nice is there is a way to force an outage. So again, of course you're doing this during a maintenance window, but you can force an outage just to find out if your settings, work as intended as well. So there is a link in this section here around documentation and guides. So, I'll tee up this first one here, which is avoiding common misconfigurations. So pretty good stuff. It'll talk you through just a handful of different scenarios to consider in terms of resiliency. So this falls outside the normal documentation into sort of leading practices that the Citrix Consulting has historically talked about when reviewing this with customers as well.
Absolutely. And another thing I would say is if you've got questions or concerns about this, XenTegra, we can help you with this. We typically implement these types of things for customers, during the design phase, and then we get them implemented into the final build. But invariably things change over time. Perhaps folks get in and not real sure what it is and maybe turn it off or adjust it. We can come in and take a look at these things and make sure that you're going to be covered in an outing. In the article, it does make reference, like Geremy said, to a lot of additional documentation that customers can use to help avoid misconfigurations. And then there is a new tech zone article on the local host cache that's important to understand. So take a look at that if you get a chance. Any other final thoughts on this topic, folks?
I just want to go back and underscore, ideally, customers are moving under the new Citrix model to DaaS. And if you haven't moved yet, you should be. You should have to ask yourself, and we as good consultants will do this. We'll say, why haven't you moved? There should be pretty good reason. Historically, it was maybe data rights discussions where this is just the metadata. Maybe it was connectivity issues and resiliency, which this type of stuff addresses in a major way. It's just, in our honest opinion, it's more valuable for you to move to DaaS and as a service than it is to try to work with us to build out a legacy type environment.
Yeah, it definitely simplifies things for customers, makes the management easier, the connectivity easier, DR and business continuity much simpler. And in doing so, obviously, you want to make sure that those environments are resilient. It used to be, you go back a couple of years, Andy, and a lot of customers said, well, to do that, I really need control of everything. I need everything in my data center or in my cloud, and I need to be able to manage it so that I can manage all of the high availability and resiliency. But that comes at a cost.
Yeah.
All the management, all of the VMs that need to be stood up for that. And Citrix has gone a long way in improving the resiliency of their cloud environment, but it's got to be configured properly.
Well, a lot of times in those conversations too, customers were lumping this into a cloud IaaS, infrastructure as a service conversation, and this is anything but that. This is platform as a service, maybe even application as a service, but it's
Right.
certainly not IaaS, and people were lumping it into conversations that it didn't belong.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest one, Andy, is I think there was two general objections I bumped into a lot. Number one was, we're not moving our workloads to the cloud, right? That's fine. I get it. The messaging can be a little cloudy. Sorry, that was not meant to be a dad joke, but so it was very misunderstood that, we're not asking you to move workloads. It's literally just the management stack, right? And through some education, usually we could get past that. The other piece was just, listen, I live in a location where cloud goes offline all the time, or the my connection to the internet's flaky, or you have these kinds of issues. And I think we've gone a long way into helping mitigate that to the point where we have some very large deployments running mission critical applications that are all managed out of Citrix Cloud, that DaaS service.
My honest thoughts on this is it's really those shops that have gone from we're not going to cloud to the ones that we're going all in on cloud, and it's forcing us to get rid of this infrastructure in the data center, or in this case data centers, to make it resilient, and that's really sped all this up. So people have gotten smarter, people understand it better, and there's also organizations that have gone complete 180, and now they're moving everything to the cloud, and this just helps that become more of a reality for the control plane as well as those workloads if and when they're ready.
Yep.
But Andy, to be fair though, I get it. There's customers that want to manage and be on-prem or manage the control plane, because we have customers who are lifting and shifting in the cloud as well. Listen, the hybrid multi-cloud license lets you pick which one you want to do, right? So you do have some options. We as Citrix are not forcing your hand. If you ask my opinion, I will tell you DaaS is probably the best way to lead with, but your environment may vary and you might have your own restrictions. We have a lot of customers who have to be on-prem for some sort of regulation that's imposed upon them. Got it, right? So you do have some options here, but I would agree with Andy. I think a lot of the objections we've had in the past have gone away. So you should feel comfortable doing it.
And as a Citrix partner, it's somewhat painful for me because I remember my very first conversation around, the Citrix control plane in the cloud. It's like, that's going to cut out a lot of our consulting services efforts. It's actually been part of 2 conversations today already. Why are we doing so little Citrix consulting versus the past? Like, well, you don't have to. It's all magic. It's kind of all there. You hit a few buttons, you do a little configuration, boom, it's done. And that's okay because we know it's going to make our customers better and we can go focus on selling and helping them with other things.
Yeah, we focus on the design and the architecture, doing it right from the outset, and less about turning the buttons and flipping the switches. And that's a different level of service, and we can come in and do assessments, free or paid, for customers to help look at things like this and look at their environments, make sure they're configured according to recommended practices and optimal, and really provide the kind of value add services that a partner like XenTegra really was born to do.
It's just the reality of things these days, and a lot of things can be done app as a service,
Right.
platform as a service is what we're talking about here, and IaaS as a service. That's just the reality, and we're fully embracing that and helping our customers get the best out of it, and our vendors, in this case, Citrix, get the best out of it.
Right. Exactly. Well, thanks, guys. Any other final parting words before we adjourn for the day?
Bill, I would tell people to go out to our website under our events and look at the Citrix Microsoft and Citrix Connect events we got coming up. I hope some of the people listening are in those markets. But if you would love for us to either come on site or I'd love for you guys to come to one of our events, we're doing about 10 of them. But if you're not in one of those places, we would love to come on site and host this for you. Maybe provide lunch and do a 2, 3, 4 hour workshop and talk through what the landscape of Microsoft plus Citrix looks like.
Yes, we have a lot of these coming up. One in New York in 2 weeks, July the 10th, and then in Boston on the 11th. And then there's a couple in there's one in Atlanta, and then in Charlotte and Raleigh. So just go to XenTegra.com/events, search for the event of choice, or scroll down the list and please attend. There's a lot to be learned from these events and a lot of peer knowledge you can gain from other attendees. So I would encourage folks to look at these and sign up if you're able. Geremy, any final thoughts?
No, I'll just double down on the Microsoft events that XenTegra is putting on. This is probably the second most requested topic when we meet with customers is, what is the story with Microsoft these days in Citrix? What are we doing with AVD? How are we providing some value there, right? So I'd highly encourage any of you, if there's something nearby or if you're willing to make the extra travel here, it's going to be well worth your time.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining today. We'll do it again next week, I guess.
See you then.
See y'all later.
All right. See you guys.